The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host, content creators, or the production company.
Welcome to the Foundations of Freedom with Jerome Huyler. A strong, vigorous economy runs on a division of labor. While some produce the goods, others provide the services we, the people, need and want. But behind everything we do, our work, our businesses, our daily lives, are the political decisions our leaders make in our name. Since we elect the men and women who write the laws that create the conditions in which we all prosper or perish, we all need to be fully informed political participants. The silent majority can no longer afford to remain silent. One of the most valuable services a free people require is the clarification of complex social, economic, and political ideas. Other media platforms offer biting commentary on the hot-button headlines of the day. This podcast service will explore the underlying causes of and the effective cures for what ails us. And this nation is ailing. Ultimately, to preserve the American dream, we will have to retrieve the principles that made that dream possible. But there are more pressing issues and concrete decisions to consider. So please stay tuned.
Struggling to get local leads? Your Google business profile could be holding you back. For just $150, we will fix your listing, boost your reviews, and deliver a 30-day action plan, all in under 1 hour. Be the first business customers find, not your competitor. Ready for more calls, more clicks, and more customers? Book your local SEO jumpstart today at setupshoponline.com or call 201-757-0134 now.
Welcome to episode 13 of the Foundations of Freedom podcast with Jerome Huyler and Vlad Gutenmaker. This episode is entitled The Intellectual Power of Common Sense, where we explore why truths grounded in everyday reality are so persuasive and how abandoning them leads to dangerous nonsense. Today, we are going to investigate the question, what makes common sense so persuasive? And how do certain propositions arise and gain assent, even though they defy common sense? What do you think, Jerry?
Okay, people who pay attention to American politics will hear conservative commentators say that the things they believe and the things they're convincing their listeners of or their viewers of are just a matter of common sense. That implies that anything that makes common sense is obviously true and has to be true. Why is that? What makes common sense so persuasive to us? That which commands common sense is so persuasive because it is so obviously true. Common sense, in short, captures our shared experiences, that which we all can observe in everyday life. It reflects the evidence of reality that is provided by our five senses. We cannot deny what we immediately observe, what we see, hear, touch, taste, or smell. From observing the way things are as we perceive them, we can carefully form obvious and empirically verifiable generalizations. Those generalizations enable us to capture undeniable, universal truths. Like, All living things grow old and eventually perish. Human beings form one such species of life. Therefore, they too must age, generate infirmities eventually, and pass away. None of us gets out of here alive. We can go further and conclude that Socrates or Steve, Joe, Bob, me are men. So we too, they too will age, slow down, and eventually pass away. There are no exceptions to the rule. That is called a syllogism. The original syllogism, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. It is a way to take a broad generalization and deduce particular truths that incontrovertibly follow from that generalization. However, to be deemed true, those fact-deducing broad generalizations must be empirically verified by piles of everyday observations. The process of induction, of inducing sound generalizations from the evidence of reality provided by our five senses, is and must be very demanding. Otherwise, the generalizations at hand cannot be trusted to be true, and the conclusions men draw, the deductions they draw from such suppositions must remain deeply suspect. Such generalizations cannot be mere arbitrary assertions backed by little or no empirical evidence. They cannot be unsubstantiated feelings or mystical instincts. Common sense can be had if and only if the generalizations in question are consistent with all human experience. We lose the ability to raise our understanding when we adopt such a broad generalization out of thin air. If it does not reflect the reality of things, we wind up with moral and political deductions and recommendations that necessarily defy common sense. And those, if you must know, usually put men in chains. Unfortunately, too many political commentators begin pontificating with their feet planted firmly in midair. Technically, this is called not empiricism, but rationalism. We will examine a number of such rationalisms a little further on and see why they defy common sense and remain arbitrary assertions with no empirical validity. In short, there are two sources of professed human understanding. Only one conduces to learning the truth of things or achieving real understanding. That which is true is indelibly grounded in human experience. It fully comports with the empirical facts we all observe daily. They tell us how to best organize social relations so as to allow societies to fulfill the requirements of life. When so-called truths regarding, quote, proper moral or political conduct arise from arbitrary, empirically unverified conclusions or generalizations, they must be regarded not as common sense, but as nonsense. Such truths do not rest or reside in reality, but are firmly lacking in empirical support. and in practical political terms, such nonsense can be dangerous and deleterious to the truly sound, that is, pro-life principles of social organization.
So, Jerry, is there an easy or automatic way of determining if a given truth or given truth claim makes common sense or if it's demonstrably false?
In the first place, any truth claim that contains contradictions necessarily defies common sense and should not be considered true. Why is that? Because there are no contradictions in reality. As the philosophers say, A is A. That is called the law of identity. The law of identity says that whatever is what it is and cannot be the opposite of what it is. Technically, that is called the law of non-contradiction and can be deduced from the law of identity. A person cannot be alive and dead, awake and asleep at the same time. A man cannot at once be completely healthy and have a heart condition, high blood pressure, and diabetes. Chairs and tables cannot fly. It is not in their nature to take wing and soar. Again, contradictions do not exist. Everything that is only what it is. The problem the contradictions we inadvertently accept is this: how are we to deal effectively with a firm, unyielding reality if we aren't willing and able to see it for what it is? If we accept contradictions, because there are no contradictions in reality. As President Barack Obama, this is just an example of one such contradiction that gives lie to the claim. As president, Barack Obama promised that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. And if you like your medical plan, you can keep your plan. Those claims were contradicted by the fact that Obamacare imposed a number of mandated coverages that most Americans were not currently signed up for and did not need or want. His false assurances were in contradiction to the facts. Nearly everyone was forced to sign up for new, more expensive, Obama-mandated insurance plans. We conclude that any claim must be thoroughly consistent to be regarded as true. Otherwise, it is a clear tip-off that the claim under consideration is necessarily erroneous.
What empirically based generalizations would you point to as examples of things that make common sense? And can you point to a particular empirical generalization that allows us to organize social relations, that enable us to form sound social and political relations?
Okay, let me offer a specific truth claim that I dare say people will regard as pure common sense. It also has far-reaching implications for social and political economic organization. Is it not the case that men and women will work if they are able to enjoy what our forefathers called the just fruits of their labor? If men and women are allowed to keep what they earn as wages, salaries, business profits, or chosen investments, they will have an incentive to invest their time, energies, and or savings on productive activity. They will invent, innovate, invest, produce, and market the goods and services that consumers need and want, and that enable human beings to live prosperous and contented lives. Isn't that the case? Will anybody dispute that? And by extension, we can safely conclude that all individuals should be free to trade the goods and services they produce with others who are just as eager to engage in voluntary trade. Let a million daily exchanges blossom and bloom. As I have said many times, prosperity is the material expression of a nation's greatness and its greatest practical reward. Well, if all are entitled to enjoy the fruits of their labor, it follows that no one has a right or should in any way seize by force or fraud that which belongs to another. Common thieves, fraudsters, and oppressive political regimes strip men and women of the incentives to engage in free trade so that fewer and fewer will want to work and be productive. When men and women work hard but gain little from their labor, they will understandably ask themselves, what the hell am I working for? Now, the greater the reward that awaits, the longer and harder men and women will work to reap the anticipated benefits, the value or values they seek to gain and or keep through their labor. Students endure 4 to 6 or more years of expensive schooling to become physicians, physicists, attorneys, prosecutors, general contractors, or hundreds of other occupations that require rigorous preparation. If the fruit of hard, productive labor will be taken away and given to others, leaving less and less for those who do the work as if they were made to live for the sake of others, men and women will have less and less reason to work. Work will not get done, things will not be produced. It is plain common sense to say that people should be able to keep what they gain, own what they earn. Men and women should enjoy the just fruits of their arduous labor. I can't imagine any rational person denying any of these truths. And that's why laissez-faire or free market capitalism, which I discussed a couple of episodes ago, works every time it is tried. It allows everyone to reap what they sow and own what they earn. It also helps us to understand why socialism fails every time it is tried. When government taxes working age, able-bodied men and women in order to give public assistance benefits to other working age, able-bodied citizens who don't mind living off the exertions of others, fewer and fewer individuals will work and less will be produced. Power-drunk despots will then have to force people to produce the things everyone wants and needs. Mandates and directives are issued, and compliance is strictly and scrupulously enforced. That, incidentally, is why and how socialism begets totalitarianism, communism, or fascism. Politics aside now, we all can observe men and women who expect other people to work so they don't have to. They are content to live off the labor of others. They have no respect for what belongs to others, their lives, their labor, and resulting possessions. Never giving a thought to what is moral, they commit theft or fraud to obtain what it is they need and want. The only consideration they entertain is, can I get away with it? At any event, it beats work. Many expect government to satisfy their pressing needs and wants. In the name of helping the poor and winning elections, politicians will not hesitate to fund well-intentioned public assistance programs. Only, as Margaret Thatcher cautioned, eventually you'll run out of other people's money, and then everything collapses. This is not to say that there aren't individuals who generally must rely on the generosity of others to meet their basic human needs and get by. Charity should be given to the genuinely needy, certainly those who are suffering through no fault of their own. But there are empirical considerations that cover that contingency. In the first place, in any generation, there aren't too many who must live off the charitable inclination of others. And many of the most handicapped individuals are happily independent and insist on caring for themselves. Also, as I argued in episode number 9, The Goodness That Greatness Begot, in a free and prosperous society, there will always be sufficient benevolence, generosity, and goodwill, not self-sacrifice, just benevolence, generosity, and goodwill to care for those few who truly can't care for themselves. These are examples of this principle. No family gets a bill for shelter, food, or transportation from St. Jude's Children's Hospital. Second, enjoying loads of $11 a month donations, Tunnel to Towers Foundation has given thousands of wounded veterans and injured first responders fully accessible, mortgage-paid homes. It has also procured hotel accommodations for over 10,000 homeless veterans. Like I said, Americans, the freest and most prosperous, are the most generous and caring people to ever people the planet. For the well-off, giving is no great sacrifice.
Jerry, can you describe a few generalizations that direct public policies, but do not arise from everyday experience and so can't be regarded as making common sense? How do those generalizations impact social life, and how do they impact social life in America? And how do they steer the course of public policy?
Let me discuss two such foundational yet erroneous generalizations. First, there is the basic premise that gives rise to all socialist experiments. Socialists believe that in any age and time, the world is governed by oppression and exploitation of the many by the few. Thus, Karl Marx famously concluded in the Communist Manifesto, quote, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. Freeman and slave, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed," unquote. In every age, the ruling class's allusions and incantations to freedom are regarded by the communists, by socialists, as lies designed to justify injustice and pacify a gullible populace. In our own age, Those lies are designed to promote capitalism. Capitalism, say the socialists, is the modern form of oppression, so say the socialists. How true are these overall generalizations? For ages, socialists have been standing up for the working classes and condemning the capitalists for their brutal exploitation of the hard-working men and women of the country. They don't see that the journeymen of old were glad to learn a productive trade from the masters who trained them to make it on their own. Socialists don't see that on the whole, today's working classes are in reality our middle classes, living in urban and suburban communities and doing just fine. They surely do not identify themselves, the middle classes, the working classes, as oppressed and exploited victims of a rampaging capitalism. To the contrary, the vast majority of Americans do not need public assistance. They're doing just fine. If there is an affordability crisis today, as some socialists claim, it is due to the oppressive levels of taxation families pay so that government can redistribute the many benefits to which all men are allegedly entitled. I say again, any family that is paying upwards of 50% in combined federal, state, and local income taxes, property, payroll, sales, social security, utility, estate, and capital gains taxes is already half slave and half free. That is what is making life unaffordable for millions of families. Ask yourselves how much better off you would be if government wasn't so big and didn't spend so much. Socialism, in short, makes no sense at all. It is what reduces once thriving societies to poverty and ruin. And it will do just that every time it is tried. Now, let's look at a second rationalist flight from empirical experience. Environmental social governments, known as ESG, is today's environmentalists' battle cry. In its name, recent administrations have been issuing directives and mandates with which individuals and industries have to comply. They almost always increase the cost of doing business. That's why such expenses come under the head of compliance costs. Nearly every legitimate business venture must contend with such interferences. They add to the cost of doing business and as such must be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. And whatever causes prices to rise causes economies to fail. Environmentally minded administrations have gone so far as to order the elimination of gas-powered vehicles and have all but banned fossil fuel production and the construction of new pipelines that carry refined fuels to far-off markets. Closing the XL Keystone pipeline, for example, cost 11,000 highly paid pipeline workers their livelihoods. Why are the mandates necessary? That takes us to our second empirically unsubstantiated generalization, to wit, the human race is facing imminent climactic extinction. Capitalism, it turns out, not only exploits the downtrodden working classes, Industrial activity, the ecologists claim, may not be destroying American families in the name of economic growth. It is the Earth's climate that is being exploited and oppressed, along with all the poor, innocent wildlife. And here, too, the woke left contradicts itself. The proliferation of massive windmill farms is likely harming aquatic life, especially whales and other seaborne species. Yet this triggers not a hint of concern from the climate change activists, who are also, at one point, wildlife enthusiasts. So now, the progressive left demands an end to our historic reliance on fossil fuels, and one can't help but noticing that the Green New Deal is just another and the latest assault on capitalism, industrial progress, and the profit-making motive. To defend their case, the environmentalists have had to demonstrate the alarming impact of runaway carbon emissions. Yet all the doom and gloom predictions the environmentalists have made over the past few decades have not once come to pass. Carbon emissions have left no enduring stamp on the climate. There is no empirical evidence that the planet faces impending atmospheric Armageddon. The so-called climate crisis is a figment of the progressives' imagination. In fact, the environmentalists don't even believe their own hype. If they did, they'd be organizing massive protest rallies in front of every Chinese and Indian embassy in the world. If the planet is being destroyed, it is those two countries that are contributing most to its destruction. The United States represents the cleanest use of fossil fuels of any industrial nation, yet it is the only nation the environmentalists want to politically put in a straitjacket. To furnish the electricity requirements of Chinese AI data centers, China has been opening coal-fired power plants week after week. Their filthy coal emissions pose a danger the likes of which the United States couldn't possibly compete. Yet it is only America's industrial activity the activists seek to curtail. It is a contradiction that belies the purity of the environmentalists' true claims and objectives. In truth, it is another iteration of the left's anti-capitalist crusade. It's not pollution the progressives object to, it's the profit motive, which for most of us makes pure common sense.
So socialism and the so-called Green New Deal, with its fear of climate change, are two of the three legs of the woke movement. I bet you could give a similar analysis of the third leg, DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, for now, I'll leave it up to our viewers to identify the flaws in that old saw. I'll leave them with a hint. The key here is the idea of merit. It is the sworn adversary of the DEI ideology. The DEI formulation, diversity, equity, and inclusion, says that people should be hired and promoted on the basis of their ethnic, racial, or religious identity. That's why they call it identity politics. But ask a student what good an automatic A on his or her report card will be for him or his or her future ambitions. Well, that's enough analysis for now. The main point is this: common sense is both persuasive and precious. Don't let it go. Once again, to all of our viewers, our many viewers, our increasing audience, I say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for considering the urgent importance of common sense and what happens when societies no longer are willing or able to follow common sense and accept principles, generalizations that are not grounded in reality, but come from some deeper alternative motive and have a very different program from that program which built America and made America as prosperous as we have become. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and keep up to date. And Vlad, you can take it out.
Okay, cool. So again, if you've stayed with us through this discussion, thank you. But as I always say, don't let this be where it ends. Let it be the point where action begins. If what you heard today resonated with you, share this podcast on your social media. Spread the word. Spark the conversation. Help others rediscover the power of common sense and recognize the dangers of ignoring it. Next, stay engaged. Pay attention to the policies being pushed in your community, in your state, and in Washington. And when you spot claims and ideas that contradict reality, speak up. Reach out to your local and state federal representatives. Let them know you stand for truth grounded in experience, not ideology built on thin air. We've made it easy. We've given you a template. Just go to the link tree, Dr. Jerome's link tree, provided at the end of this podcast, and you have everything you need to find your local representatives to send them a letter. And if you want to dive deeper into these ideas, get Dr. Huyler's books on Amazon. They are essential reading for anyone who wants to understand the constitutional principles, the economic truths, and the moral foundations that built this country and that can still save it. So finally, subscribe to Dr. Huyler's YouTube channel, Jerome Huyler on YouTube, where you'll find every episode of the Foundations of Freedom podcast, along with more thought-provoking content. Let's keep the conversation alive, because when common sense fades, freedom soon follows.